At first light on the high desert, a worn-out ex-cavalry scout had cut the chains from an Apache woman left to die by traders, expecting gratitude and a clean chance to feel like a hero again. But she stepped back from him, wrists bleeding, stared at the old army coat still on his shoulders and said, calm and cold, that she would rather choose death than owe her life to a man like him. The first sound isn't her voice, it's metal hitting sand. That dull, ugly clank as the last length of chain slipped from her wrists and dropped beside the dry arroyo, just as the sun was dragging a thin line of light over the rim of the desert. Jace Holloway straightened up, chest heaving, breath steaming in the cold. He'd ridden half the night to get here, cutters biting into his palm, telling himself he was doing something good, something clean, something that might make up for the things he'd done in a different coat under a different flag. In his head, this moment always ended the same way. Relief, gratitude, maybe a whispered thank you. Instead, the Apache woman pushed herself up from the sand with slow, deliberate movements. Like every muscle hurt, but her pride refused to show it. Her name, he'd been told, was Iona. It meant eternal blossom, someone once said, but there was nothing soft in her now. Her wrists were raw, torn open where iron had chewed at her skin, dust turning the blood to rust. She looked at her hands, at the broken shackles in the dirt, and then at him. Not at his face at first, at his coat. That old cavalry coat he'd thrown on for warmth, still carrying the faint, faded insignia of men who'd ridden against her people. The light caught the stitching, and you could almost see the moment she recognized it. Her eyes hardened, dark and steady, and she took a step back like distance was the only air she trusted. When she finally spoke, it wasn't a cry or a sob or even a shout. It was a sentence being handed down. I'd choose death over you. And here's where you feel the ground shift under Jace's boots. Because he's still holding the cutters like a hero in his own story. But in her eyes, he's just another man in the same cruel uniform. Another face behind the raids, the chains, the graves. He thinks he's just rescued her. She thinks she's staring at a new captor wearing old colors. And that contradiction, that uncomfortable, jagged space between how we see ourselves and how our actions look to someone who's been hurt by people like us before. That's where this entire story begins. She didn't thank him. She didn't even look back. Iona just turned toward the distant cut of the mesas, the horizon already starting to shimmer as the sun climbed higher, and began to walk. Her steps were uneven, a faint drag in her right leg that told its own story. Jace noticed the dark patch on her side, the way her hand hovered near it once, then pulled away like she refused to acknowledge pain. He also knew the lay of this land better than he wanted to admit. The only sure water for miles lay behind them, not ahead. Watching her limp into the growing heat felt like watching someone walk into a slow, deliberate execution. He could have let her go. She'd made her choice, and Lord knew he'd done what any decent man would have said was enough. But his boots moved anyway. Not beside her, where it would look like partnership. Not far behind, where it would feel like sneaking. 30 paces. Just close enough that if she collapsed, he'd reach her. Just far enough that she couldn't accuse him of trying to own her freedom. He called out once, offering water. Another time, a horse, a better trail. Her answers came back like thrown stones, short, sharp, cutting him off before he could sound noble. When he drifted a little closer, she didn't tane, didn't flinch. Her fingers just closed around a small bone-handled knife at her belt, a silent warning that said, keep your distance or bleed. The sun rose higher, pressing down on both of them, heat turning the air into a wavering curtain. Her shoulders tightened, her pace stubborn, her body clearly fading, but every line in her posture screamed that she would rather fall face first into the sand than lean on a man in that coat. And that's the tension you can feel even from where you are. Two people walking the same path, bound by danger, torn apart by everything that uniform means. By midday, the desert stopped pretending to be patient. The light went from gold to white, the kind that stripped shadows from everything except the rocks that refused to move. Iona's steps finally hit that point where they won't step so much as while dragging flesh forward, and without looking at him she lifted her chin toward a jagged outcrop jutting from the baked earth. We rest there, she said. Not a plea, not a suggestion, just a statement of fact that folded him into her survival whether she trusted him or not. The strip of shade barely deserved the name. It was enough for maybe one person to tuck against the stone, but the two of them ended up shoulder to shoulder, backs pressed to rock that still held morning cool, knees almost touching in the cramped space. The heat outside turned the air into a furnace. The heat between them was something else entirely. Jace locked his joints like distance could be created from posture alone, but it didn't change the simple truth. She was close enough that he could smell dust, sweat, and the copper's sting of blood seeping through the cloth at his side. "You're bleeding through," he said quietly. "Let me clean it." Her head turned just enough for him to see the flash in her eyes. "So you can mark what you saved." The word twisted. He shook his head. "So you don't die from rot before you make it anywhere. Infection kills faster than any bullet." The silence that followed stretched thin. Then she shifted, turning her back slightly toward him, drawing the fabric aside just enough, her knife laid within easy reach against her thigh. The message was clear. "This is my choice, not your command." His hands shook as he poured water, as he dabbed away blood and sand, as he saw the ugly tear where metal had bitten deep. "You're not trembling because you're afraid of hurting me," she said, voice low, eyes fixed on the horizon. "You're trembling because you remember what your hands already did." And in that one line, you can feel how clearly she sees through him, cutting straight to guilt he hasn't dared name out loud. By the time darkness settled over the desert, the heat had traded places with a different kind of danger. They built the fire small and low inside a shallow dip in the ground, shielding it with piled stone so the flames wouldn't be seen from a distance. At first they sat opposite each other, the fire a thin line between two worlds that had collided by accident. But as the temperature dropped and the wind picked up, practicality made its own quiet argument. Inch by inch, they shifted closer until the glow brushed both their faces in the same circle of light. Iona watched him for a long time before she spoke. "Why are you still here?" she asked. Not grateful, not curious, just testing the edges of his answer. He tried deflection, said he owed a debt to no one anymore. But his eyes flickered, and she caught it. "What village did you ride through?" she pressed. Then she laid out the details like evidence. A burned camp years ago, graves dug up, sacred items scattered, children gone. The pattern was so precise it felt like she'd been there, and his stomach turned because he had. As a young scout, he'd ridden with a unit that cleared an Apache settlement, telling himself it was orders, that if he didn't go, someone else would. 17. That was the number that never left him. 17 faces, 17 bodies. When he finished, she sat silent, carved from stone. Then she said the part that cut deepest. That village was her kin, cousins, elders, a younger brother who returned to nothing but smoke and bones. She didn't spit at him or offer forgiveness. She just looked at his coat and asked, "Are you still wearing that because you forgot who you were, or because you don't want to remember?" And in that moment, the coat stopped being clothing and became the weight of every choice he'd tried to bury. The desert felt almost kind for a few hours after that, quiet and cool in the deep hours before dawn, until the sound of hooves shredded the stillness. Rough voices rode the wind, angry, cursing, close enough that the ground carried their weight. The traders and the deputy hadn't cut their losses after all. They'd circled back, furious at losing what they called property. Iona and Jace moved fast, every muscle suddenly awake. She grabbed his sleeve and dragged him toward a narrow cleft in the rocks he never would have noticed in the dark, forcing them both sideways through a slit barely wide enough for one. Inside, there was no room to pretend they weren't sharing the same breath. It was pitch black, her back pressed to his chest, his hands braced on the stone beside her shoulders so he wouldn't crush her, their lungs working in shallow, quiet pulls as the riders drew nearer. He felt for his revolver out of habit. Her hand clamped over his wrist, fingers digging in. "You shoot, they kill us both," she whispered, her breath warm against the stone. "You wait, maybe we get to choose." Boots hit the ground outside. One man dismounted, scanning the rocks. Coming so close Jace could hear leather creak and spays knock. Instinct took over. He shifted, putting his body between her and the faint opening like a shield. This time she didn't pull away. The men argued, then finally decided to ride south, hooves fading. In the heavy silence afterward, still pressed together in the dark, Iona asked, softer now, why are you still here, knowing who I am and what I know about you? Jace answered without bravado. He would ride back, stand in that town, testify against the deputy and traitors, name every crime he'd seen, even if the rope waiting ended up around his own neck. Her silence stretched again, but this time her eyes, when she finally turned enough for him to sense her looking back, felt like they'd just checked a box on a test she'd been giving him since first light. By midday, they reached a place the land itself seemed to divide them, a high ridge where the world dropped away into deep canyons and layered mesas painted in reds and browns, the kind of country where Jace's kind went in only once and usually didn't come back. Iona walked right to the edge, when tugging her hair and the fringe of her clothes, looking down at home. Jace stopped several paces back, every instinct telling him he had no right to cross that line. He cleared his throat, offered one last compromise, saying he could ride with her a little farther, stay out of sight, make sure no one followed. She turned on him then, eyes sharp, and told him the truth he hadn't thought about. If he followed her into her land, he wouldn't just put himself in danger, he'd stain her in the eyes of her people, turn survival into the kind of betrayal that never washes off. Then she shifted the ground under his feet again. She said she remembered him, not from the fire and the 17 dead, but from a river crossing years earlier, when a younger Jace had hesitated, then quietly turned his horse away instead of firing on a group of women and children. Back then, she'd watched from the brush and wondered if he was a coward or a man not fully lost. I didn't need you to cut my chains, she said now, voice steady. I needed to know if you'd break your own. Every mile he'd walked behind her, every offer, every confession had been part of a test she'd never named out loud. And by choosing to go back and stand against his own law instead of hiding behind it, he'd finally given her the answer she'd been waiting on since that river. They stood closer than they had all day, the wind snapping at the edge of his coat like it was trying to tear it off him itself. Between them, that faded cavalry blue felt less like cloth and more like a ghost of everything he'd been. Orders followed, villages burned, silence worn like armor. Iona's gaze didn't soften, but it steadied. She told him plainly that she would go back to her people, warn them about the traitors and the deputy, make sure no one else woke up in chains by that arroyo. He, she said, had a different road. He was to turn around, ride into town, and speak the truth out loud. What he did, what he saw, who took profit from Apache's suffering, knowing those same white men might hang him, run him out, or worse. This isn't to hurt you, she said. It's the only way your breath still has weight in this world. Jace reached up, fingers finding the buttons of his coat. He shrugged it off and let it fall between them, a quiet, deliberate refusal of the identity that had once given him permission to look away. For one heartbeat, it felt like the world paused. They were close enough that a hand could rise, a mouth could find the other, and they both knew it. Instead, Iona stepped forward and laid her palm flat against his chest, feeling the steady, fragile thud beneath. Live long enough that my people hear what you said with your own mouth, she told him. That will be enough. Then she turned and walked into Apache country without looking back, her figure swallowed by ridges and light that were never meant for him. Jace watched until there was nothing left to see, then bent, picked up the coat one last time, and hurled it over the edge of the ridge, letting it tumble into the canyon like a piece of his old self he finally refused to carry. When he turned toward town, it wasn't with the swagger of a man seeking redemption. It was with the slow, measured step of someone who knows the only thing he has left to offer is truth spoken at his own expense. And if you're still with me here, watching this man walk into the storm he helped create, remember this. Out on the frontier and in our own lives, real courage isn't cutting someone else's chains. It's breaking the ones you built inside your own chest. If stories like this make you think about what real respect and accountability look like, don't forget to share this video, subscribe for more Frontier Tales, and tell us in the comments what freedom means to you.